page S, the fifth page of the printout of the mimer, and we were talking about that when we have the union of Za and Malchus, which is the idea of Rish Chodesh. Rish Chodesh, we said, is Yichud Shimsha V'Sira. It's the joining of the sun and the moon, which the moon is at level of spheres of Malchus, and the sun is the level of Zeir Anpin. And that's what causes, just like in the physical sense, that when the sun meets up with the moon, that begins its new light of the new month. The same thing in the spiritual level of the spheres. We also have the same type of unity. We have the unity of the sun and the moon of the spheres, Za and Malchus, and that causes a new Tosefos, a new addition of light and revelation. Now, we also explained that it's not just that Rish Chodesh, we have a union of Zeir Anpin and Malchus, but really we have a union of Chachma Bina. That is the cause why there's this union of Za and Malchus. And higher than that, there's a level from Arich Anpin and Atik, and even into the level of Atzmus, because to be able to create a new being, we need to have the idea of Tolda, the idea of union of the feminine and masculine, create something new. That needs to have the power of Hashem's essence, because only He can create something totally new. Now he says that the way how it reaches into Malchus is not in a way that it's passing through the level prior to it, but rather in a way of becoming enclosed first in the level of Zeir Anpin, and then it comes into Malchus. So that's why, even though we traced it back, and we said this union of Zoh and Malchus is something that goes all the way back to Chachma Bina, Arich Anpin, Atik Yomin, Keser, and so on. But we don't call it Yichud, let's say, Chachma and Malchus. We don't call it Yichud of Keser and Malchus, Atzmus and Malchus. We call it Yichud Kutchubrich Shchinte, because even though it comes from these very high levels, but it's still not going through in a way, but derech ma'ivir, it's going through in a way of derech islachus. So now he's going to explain that there's even higher levels of Rosh Chodesh. As we mentioned before, that there's, the Zohar says, since it says Roshei Chodshechem, there are multiple Rosh Chodesh, even in Rosh Chodesh itself. So in every Rosh Chodesh, there's at least two levels of Rosh Chodesh, maybe even more. But the Zohar says two levels of Rosh Chodesh as hinted in the words Rosh Chodesh. So we're holding line 11, fifth page, page test. Yes, in the Rosh Chodesh, there is also, it says Rosh Chodesh in the plural. Rosh means terrain, that there is the two heads, b'chol yarcha v'yarcha. Every month has really two levels of Rosh Chodesh. What are the two levels? V'inun Yaakov v'Yosef v'Mavur b'Zoyar. These are the levels corresponding to Yaakov Avinu and Yosef Tzaddik, like the Zohar explains, that this has to do with the two levels of Rosh Chodesh. The idea behind this is in Yaakov and Yosef. It's known the difference between Yaakov and Yosef. The idea of Yaakov, even in the lowest level, is the world of Atzilus. The Avos are called the divine chariot because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the levels corresponding to the core and the center of Atzilus. Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So you have that idea that it has to do with Atzilus. It traces back even higher. It goes all the way up to Chachma, which is the sphere of Atzilus. But essentially, Yaakov and the Avos in general, and Yaakov especially, he was the Bechir Shel Avos, the most chosen one of the Avos. He represents Atzilus. The Ilu in Yon Shel Yosef, as opposed to the level of Yosef, who shall Yodin Nasam Shocha Ba'ilmus Pri Yitzirasi, through Yosef becomes the drawing down of Atzilus into the world of Biyah. Before Badrushim Malapasik, Elatolis Yaakov Yosef, like it's explained in the Mamarim and the Pasuk, these are the offspring of Yaakov, which is Yosef. In other words, what Yaakov has in Atzilus, Yosef is now the offspring. Yosef communicates that and draws that down into the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi. In general, Yosef's level is the level of the Midas of Atzilus. Before B'Torah Eir, was saying, like it's explained in Torah Eir, using the actual, like it's brought down in the language of the Alter Rebbe himself. In other words, there are certain Mamarim the Alter Rebbe that are transcriptions of other people that wrote down the Mamarim the Alter Rebbe. Then there's a section in Torah Oir, the Torah that has the actual language of literally what the Alter Rebbe himself wrote down. So he writes over there, the Inyan HaKruvim, he writes concerning the Kruvim that were on the images of the Kruvim, the Malachim that were on the Aron in the Kodesh HaKadosh. Okay, so it says, it describes, the Pasuk describes, Kruv Echad Mikatzim Mizeh, Kruv Echad Mikatzim Mizeh. One kruv was on this end of the Aron, and one kruv was at this end of the Aron. So there's significance to the idea that it's called katze, end, because each one indicates a certain end of a series of levels. So it says, line 23, is that one kruv is from this end, indicating what is it an end of. We could say Eirin Sof, it's the end of the Eirin Sof, the way it comes down into the Midas of Atzilus. So Eirin Sof like ends over there before starting the transition to go into the worlds of Biyah. Kruv Echad Mikatzim is that. And the other Kruv that's from this end, what is that going on top of page Yud? It's the source for the worlds of Bria Yitzira Asiyah. So what do we see? The two kruvim, one is at the end of this level and one is at the end of this level, means that you have, this is the meeting point. The two kruvim is the meeting point between the Eirin Sof and the worlds. So that comes out that from the level of the Midas that we said before, that's the level of Yosef Tzaddik, that Yosef is connected with the level of Ilmus Biyah, and he carries down Yaakov's transmissions to the world of Biyah. So we have from the level of the Ezeram, that's the ends of the infinite worlds. That's where it comes into the beginning of the worlds of the creations, the levels of Malchus. In other words, that's the other crew. One crew is the end of the Eirin Sof, that's the Erampin. The other crew is the level of Malchus, which is already the beginning of the worlds of Biyah. So the fact that they meet up means that the Erampin already is connecting to and associating with the worlds of Biyah. So Yosef, which is the level of Zeir Ampin, is about Bri Yitzirasi. On the other hand, what's the level of Yaakov? We said Yaakov is Atzilus itself. Therefore, it's higher and it is like removed from the worlds of Biyah. Line 4, the idea of Yaakov is higher than the level of Zeir Ampin, the way it connects and has to do with the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi. Atzilus Guf, in Atzilus itself, it's higher. Flawless in Atzilus, Sfiras HaChachma. The general idea of Atzilus is the Sfira of Chachma. In Maimer, like Kuni Zohar says, Abba Ilah, the supernal father, which is going on Chachma, Chachma Bina's father and mother. Mekanan of Atzilus nests in Atzilus. Bina is in Bria, the 6 meters of Yetzirah. So if we say that Yaakov Avinu is the level of Atzilus, that means he's associated, he's a level of Chachma. So there is Chachma, represented by Yaakov. There's a level of Yosef, which is the level of Zeir Ampin, the way it has to do with further. So now, based on understanding that there's the Yaakov, which is Chachma, and Yosef, which is Zeir Ampin, He's going to run the parallel idea of Rosh Chodesh. One level of Rosh Chodesh, we said, that's the union of Za and Nukva. True. Gets from Chachma Bina, gets from Keser, Atganarech, it gets from Atzmos, but it's all going through B'derech Islapshus, and the true connection, what is it called? It's called Za and Malchus. That's the lower level of Rosh Chodesh, the level having to do with Yosef, the level, the way it connects to the worlds of Bia. Then there's a higher level of Rosh Chodesh. There's the level of Rosh Chodesh, where it's the level of Yaakov. So it says, Valpizi Yeshloimer, line 7. According to this, we could say, Gambi in Rosh Chodesh Yaakov Yosef, also concerning the heads of the months, that there is two levels of heads, two beginnings. There is Shabarosh Chodesh Nimshach, Loirak Zer Ampin Yosef. Not only does Rosh Chodesh come down from the level of Zer Ampin Yosef, which is what we spoke about earlier in this ois, the Yichud of Zah and Malchus, the Yichud of Zah and Nukva, but Elagam Ebchinas Chachmo Bina Yaakov. When it comes to the level of Rosh Chodesh, there's the level of Rosh Chodesh that's higher than the Rosh Chodesh of Yosef. The second level of Rosh Chodesh, it's the level of Yaakov, the level of Chachma coming into Pirush Advarim. What does this mean? Sham Shochi ba'efim shali slapsh. Loi bebchinas eirampin, elo bebchinas Chachma bina. Rather, the hislapshus is in the level of Chachma bina. When it's coming to Chachma Bina, it's called enclosed in comparison to the level above. In other words, just like we said before when we were talking about the lower level of Rosh Chodesh, we said even though the Yichud of Zohar Nuk comes from the Yichud of Chachma Bina, comes from Arik, comes from Atik, comes from Atzmos, still in all, it's called Yichud Zohar Malchus. Why? Because all those other levels had to eventually come into a way of Islapshus till it came to Zohar Malchus. So in a similar vein, when he talks about the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, which is the level of Yaakov, which is the union not of Zohar and Malchus, but the union of Chachma Bina. So over there, the higher levels, it's not called the union of Atganarech, it's not called the union of Atzmus and Chachma. It's just like we said, by Zohar Malchus, it's Bislapshus till it hits Zohar. The same thing, it's Bislapshus till it comes to Chachma Bina. But afterwards, has Chachma Bina, Bacharkach, line 15, Ba Bezer Ampin B'derech Ma'ivir. In the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, the higher revelation of Rosh Chodesh, instead of in the lower level of Rosh Chodesh, even what comes down into Zohar and Malchus is the way of Islapshus. And it becomes changed, and because it becomes enclosed in it, and it's not just passing through, but in the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, in the level of Rosh Chodesh, that's the level of Yaakov, not the level of Yosef, the level of Atzilus itself, the level of the union of Chachma Bina. So the way Chachma Bina now comes down is in the way of Ma'ivir through Zohar and Malchus. So the Rebbe says, though there is still some type of idea that becomes enclosed in Zohar and Malchus, yet, since we are calling this the union of Chachma Bina, we're not calling it the union of Zohar and Malchus. That means because the way it's going into Zohar and Malchus is only B'derech Ma'ivir. Like we said before, whatever it's called, the union is called, that shows that over there it's in a way of Islam. The fact that it's not called by Zohar and Malchus, this higher level, the level of Yaakov, the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, is not called the union of Zohar and Malchus, but rather it's called the union of Chachma Bina. That's because the way up till Chachma Bina, it's coming down Bislapshus, Keser into Chachma, into Bina, it's Bislapshus. Then, the way it comes down to us, it just passes through, it's B'derech Ma'ivir through Zohar Malchus. At least, in general, even though there's some type of Islapshus over there. Okay, let's stop over here and let's open up the questions. This might have been a little bit confusing. So any questions before we go on?
Not a question, but basically you're saying whatever that high level is doesn't come filtered completely. It retains its high level that it's coming from, and we
and
have that
that's
somehow.
why it's called by that name.
Right.
So a lower level unity is called, even though it has a root all the way in Atzmus, but since the way it comes down is in the way of Islapshus, and therefore it's changed in the process, it doesn't retain that higher level. So therefore it's called by the lower level. But something that stays on the higher level, Yichud Chachma Bina, the higher level of Rish Chodesh, the level of Yaakov, that is a type of level that is therefore called by a higher type of unity. It's not called Yichud Zav and Nukva, it's called the level of Yaakov, Yichud of Chachma.
Is this one of the reasons the brothers didn't recognize Joseph?
That's earlier. It says that the brothers did not understand how we could deal with and handle the level of Yah, how he can, which in simple terms meant how he could deal with the world.
And
This is all happening
sorry, go ahead, Rowan.
This all happening in Atzilus?
This is all happening in Atzilus, but again, it impacts our world. So the reason why Yosef, for example, was able to deal with Mitzrayim and the brothers couldn't even comprehend that is because Yosef knew how to transition and go from Atzilus into Bia. But that's really more of a side point. It's not really.
Can we say that this is why Rosh Chodesh is a different day than the rest of the days because of that aspect that retains from the Mala, that it's the lower aspect is, I guess, the regular or.
But the main, that's not the main part that he's trying to explain. The main part that he's trying to explain is the multiple levels. Explain the multiple levels of Rish Chodesh. That's what he's saying. There's the Yaakov level of Rish Chodesh, there's the Yosef level of Rish Chodesh. They're bringing from Zoin into Bia, or the level in Atzilus itself. Okay, let's go on to line 18, page Yud, 6th page of your copies. Yuvan Behegdim, this will be understood by first prefacing, Klolas Habir B'Mailas Rish Chodesh Tabishayim Yaakov. Here is what he's addressing what you were saying, Ariel. Explaining the general idea of the advantage that Rish Chodesh has over all the rest of the days of the month. Because we see in Torah, Rish Chodesh is treated differently, but not as different as, let's say, Shabbos and Yom Tov. He says, on the one hand, you're allowed to do work on Rish Chodesh, not like on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Kolmok still in all. We find in Tanakh that it's not called a day of action. It's not a regular weekday. Obviously, there's extra karbonos brought in the base of Mikdash and so on. So there's some type of like middle ground over here. He says, that's explained about this in Mamorim, what's the idea of weekdays? Like it says, 6 days Hashem made the heavens and the earth. Famous thing, it's also in the Bar Mitzvah Maimer. It doesn't say that Hashem made the world in 6 days, but it says 6 days Hashem made the world. Like the Zohar brings this exact language, which is Bar Baruch, which was Harashba, it's also explained at length in the response of the Rashba. So why does it say Sheishes Yomim Asa, not Sheishes Yomim? Sheishes Hayomim Atzmam, top of page Yud Aleph, the very 6 days themselves. Heim Sheishes Yemei Binyan are the 6 days of the building of the world. In other words, there's the 6 days of meaning the 6 revelations. Every midah is a day, it's another revelation. So the 6 midas that are known as 6 days, they themselves created the world. So this is normal weekdays, not Shabbos and not Yom Tov and not even Rosh Chodesh. That the middays are directly involved with the world. I know in the weekdays, you may have Maisa, those days are called days of action, not like Rosh Chodesh, which even though it's permitted to do work, is not called the days of action. So during the days of action, during the regular, ordinary weekday, Mekabelus HaMalchus, Nashisha Midas Zeirampi, Malchus receives from the six emotions the level of Zeirampi. So he explains, what does that mean in a inner sense? What does it mean, Malchus receiving from Midas? Dugmas Hadibra Maisa, similar to by a person down here, the level of his speech, and even the level of his action, Zeu Inyan HaMalchus. The level of a person's speech and action correspond to the sphere of Malchus. And where does a person's speech and where does a person's action come from? What animates them? What brings them about? The speech and the action of a person receives their matters from the emotions in the heart. Either when a person has a feeling of love or feeling the opposite of love. These two midas, they include all the other emotions. So the emotions of a person feeds his speech and feeds his action. I speak because of something that's pushing me to speak. An emotion pushing me to speak. I'm doing something because something is pushing me to do it with another emotion, not love, opposite, etc. That is during the rest of the week. Sheishes Yemei HaMaisa, the six midos impact and direct the speech and the action. Line 6. Amdam b'Rosh Chodesh mekabelos hamalchus mechachma sheloi be'emtzos v'al chuponim sheloi be'slapshus b'shisha mitzvos. On Rosh Chodesh, we said before, the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, Malchus receives all the way from Chachma, not through the intermediary, at least not in the way that becomes enclosed in the six emotions. Therefore, because it's receiving it all the way from Chachma, that's the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, the level of Yaakov. It's bypassing the level of the emotions. Because of that, we'll explain, it's even though it's weekdays, it's not Yemei HaMaisa, as he will explain. So he says, line 9, Kashal Hadibra Maisa, what's an example of Chochma coming straight down into speech, with bypassing the emotion? Or coming down into action, bypassing the emotion. That's when you have, let's say, a chokhmah about astronomy. It's called chokhmas atchuna in Hebrew. So, or something similar that doesn't really have an emotional connection to the person. If a star is located in a certain place, if a planet is located in a certain place in the sky, it doesn't impact me emotionally. But I could speak about it, or I could do something because of it. For example, I could figure out when Yom Tov is based on it, or some other things. So the Chachma, the idea, the pure concept is coming into the speech and into the action without need for, without any connection with emotion. This is similar to other types of wisdom, other types of sciences that are not connected to and do not need an emotion to cause when a person is talking about this particular science, about how a car works or how to work his cell phone. These things, you don't need to get emotional about it to bring it down to speech and to action. By understanding how it works, and now he puts it into speech, he explains it, he puts it into action, he uses it, etc. There's no revealed intermediary of emotion. That's like we were talking about the higher level of Rosh Chodesh coming from Chachma straight into Dibur and Maisa, at least not in a way of Islapshus. So the Rebbe says a very interesting thing. It doesn't mean that there's absolutely no emotion at all involved, because in any endeavor that a person is involved in, especially something as important as Chokmah, there is a certain emotional background or premise underlying. So he says in the brackets, line 12, behind this means, so that a person should be able to arrive at this idea. So when a person develops an insight, an idea in astronomy or in biology, or whatever type of science, he has to at least have some type of connection. He has to have some type of feeling for the topic. It's similar to what the Chazal given advice. A person should always study a topic in Torah that he has a desire for. The same thing. Why does one person head into the field of astronomy and another person heads into the field of technology and a third person into engineering and a fourth person into medicine? Because these particular fields of scientific endeavor, these particular chachmas, are things that he has a love for, whether the outcome, whether the ideas themselves, or at least al derech zeh, in a similar vein, he also, or instead, he can at least have a fear that he is scared he shouldn't make a mistake in this chachma. Now, if this chachma doesn't matter to him whatsoever, why would he care that he makes a mistake in his astronomical calculations, if he makes mistakes in math, if it doesn't matter to him whatsoever? So there's no room for fear. So the fact that the person has a fear is a motivator and a trigger for getting involved and really analyzing this particular topic and this particular idea. Mikol Mokim. This is only the background. Here we're talking about once I have already come up with the idea. Once the person already reached and he already comprehended the idea, in the Kadesh, so to be able to now come. The fact I have it in my mind, okay, I understand it. Now I need to communicate it to someone else. Not just in a way that I'm speaking about it, but as actually some actions are going to result from it. I'm going to make something based on this. I'm going to build something, whatever. In that transition from when it's in my mind to my speaking about it or acting upon it, there is no need that it should travel through the midas. That is analogous to this higher level of Rish Chodesh, to the level of Rish Chodesh that comes from Chachma and bypasses everything else and comes into Malchus. It says after the bracket, line 19, since Malchus receives from Chachma, not through becoming enclosed in the 6 emotional traits, that these are the 6 days. Therefore, it's not called the day of action, because the days of action, the days of creation, are associated with the 6 midas. And since this is not something that's associated with the 6 midas, it's beyond the 6 midas, it's bypassing the 6 midas, so we don't call it the term Yom HaMais. Though it's permitted to do work with on the day of Rish Chodesh. Why is that so? Since the Chachma is drawn down from above to below, reaching all the way to Spheres of Malchus, the way Spheres of Malchus is in its place. It's not that Malchus is going up or Malchus is being changed. Chachma is, like we said, bypassing all the levels on the higher level of Rosh Chodesh and coming down to Malchus. The place and the idea of Sfiras Malchus is the idea of action. Like we said before, Malchus represents speech, and Malchus represents action by a person. So that's why, on the one hand, action is permitted. Malacha is permitted because Chachma is coming into Malchus. So it's dealing with Malchus. Malchus exists. Action is okay. But to call it Yemei HaMaisa, days of action is indicative of the 6 days of creation, meaning the 6 midos. Since on Rosh Chodesh, it's bypassing the 6 midos. It's only B'derech Maiver through the 6 midos. That is why it's not called Yemei HaMaisa. We'll stop over here. Any questions?